Hey everybody, welcome to Signal and Noise, podcast brought to you by Market Once. It's an ROI rocket company where my name is Brian Lamar and Andrew DeCilles are employed. How are you, sir? How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing very well, Brian. How are you today?
Really good. We'll probably have an end of year rundown episode. But today we have Sam Cohen. He's the CEO of Fairgen. I'm really excited to talk to him. Sam, how are you, sir?
Very good, very good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. We've spoken to you guys a little bit. I haven't had you on the podcast before, but you're new. At least my understanding is you're newer to the marketing research, and you're doing some really cool stuff. And I'm excited to kind of get deep into it as much as we can over the next 45 minutes. And so, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so maybe we can start off. I checked out your LinkedIn a little bit. You have kind of an interesting background. You speak multiple languages. It looks like you've kind of gone to school all over the place. Maybe a little bit about yourself to start us off.
Indeed. So I was born in France, but I moved to Singapore when I was young. Studied there, high school, and so on, and then moved to the UK. I studied maths, and then really started to specialize in everything AI. I did a master's at Oxford, and a thesis actually on synthetic data, which is when I started to get there, but really from a foundational AI and mathematical traditional perspective. Then did a PhD also on the same topic at UCL in London. Spent most of my PhD time at Facebook AI Research Labs, externally, internally, spent a lot of time there. And then started Fairgen. Really was my thesis at the time was that market research is a massive industry and it's completely driven by data, and data is harder to get pretty much every day. It's more costly, it's lower quality, and if I can basically generate more data than what we have with the tools that we currently have, then I can probably create a lot of value. So that's how we started it.
Fantastic. So what years were you doing your PhD? I'm just curious if I can line that up with kind of, like when I started using ChatGPT. Where was artificial intelligence when you started really getting into the weeds?
Yeah, so I did my first internship actually in AI in 2015. Did one in 16 too, and then did a research internship also in 2018 in Singapore. And so I really had an industry perspective on AI. And then I did my master's, and my first basically experience around synthetic data was in 2018, actually. So much before this became a thing. I were struggling at the time to generate 32 by 32 pixel images. It was like another world. And I was really focused on basically generating all types of data, images, text, tabular data, not surveys at the time, a bit later than that. And then towards the end of the PhD and basically the start of Fairgen, ChatGPT happened, which really put this at the front of everything, and it really helped us basically grow just from the fact that it worked.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were definitely in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I like to think so.
So what made you consider marketing research? I know, like you said, obviously it's a large space, and there's kind of this market opportunity as prices go up and quality goes down. But why marketing research instead of kind of going into software? Like, how were you aware of marketing research from another project you had worked on or something like that?
That's a good question. So when we started the company, we were looking to find an industry to go all in, and basically, every other industry is pretty crowded. Also with synthetic, synthetic is a thing in the healthcare industry since maybe 7 years, in the financial services industry too. So it's super crowded, and I like to disrupt. I don't like to try to get straight into the competition with hundreds of vendors and just try to get 2% improvement over them. I wanted to make a big change. One of our first investors was a fairly famous pollster in the US. And he told me, wow, I'm struggling so hard to get good quality samples. And I was like, I probably can help. And that's how we basically started exploring with his projects, like running elections all around the world. And I was like, there's something there, let's dig. And then decided to go all in on the market research industry.
Very cool. Very cool. So it sounds like you started the company around 2020. Is that right? Give us a little bit of the history of the company.
So 22 actually. So I did my PhD.
Okay.
My PhD in 2019, and started Fairgen in 22, pretty much when I wrapped up the PhD.
Mhm.
And so now it's been pretty much 3 years, a bit more even. And yeah, 3 years basically, going really step by step, trying to make things right rather than try to, take this wall and break it with a finger. So really
Mhm.
take things step by step, prove that it works, iterate with real customers, and deliver real value.
And what did that timeline look like, right? So you finish your PhD, you start the company, and today you have a product to sell, right? But there's 3 years in the middle. Was it, you in your basement with a laptop for the first year? Like how did everything kind of evolve?
So we raised money straight away on pretty much day one. So we raised our first like small proceeds of $2.5 million in June 22, which is when everything officially started. We hired a small team of really strong people. So at the time, like we were maybe 8, really focused on basically making these algorithms work, and really really fast and early we found strong design partners in Europe. As the first one was EFOP, so it's a
Mhm.
traditional market research agency,
Yep.
and they're really known for super high quality, not only data, but also insights and analysis, which was very important for us. And we iterated with them on a lot of different types of projects and improve the modeling, the delivery, the product, the scale, everything you need to actually get it integrated. And there was 100 reasons why this was way harder than we thought on day one.
Yeah.
And so it took maybe 2 years to get to some things that you can really trust. And
Yeah.
we raised money again, by the way. So we raised money again a year and a half after. So we
Right.
raised 9 million in total, and we're now 23, basically. Yeah.
Well, you're definitely onto something with that kind of growth and the ability to raise those kinds of funds. We actually EFOP is a client of ours, so we know everyone over there as well. You're absolutely right. That's a fantastic team to partner with. Yeah, we work with their North American division over here and help do product tests and things like that. So certainly familiar with them. Okay, so in our kind of corner of the market research world, right? We're all talking about synthetics. That term can mean a million different things. And unfortunately, to someone like yourself, there probably is a technical definition, but here we're using it for almost everything, right? So tell us, in your own words and concisely, kind of like what is Fairgen?
Yeah. So maybe if I can just suggest one thing on the synthetic side, there's
Yeah.
created like so much noise. Like here, podcast is signals and noise, and so here it's
Mhm.
mostly noise. And
Yeah.
so I really like to think first about what is this all about, right? And so what this is all about is generating survey responses that are gonna complement what you have, whether you already you know surveyed people or whether you're doing things from scratch. So I think that kind of covers pretty much every kind of use cases, and you can think of it as simulation, either partial in the sense that you already collected a survey and you're gonna basically amplify it using basically model generated data, or full simulation, which is from will have like an LLM pre-trained on a lot of data and orchestrated in a way that is going to generate responses to new surveys without having collected any data for that survey. So I like to I don't like to just say this is synthetic and we're doing synthetic that way. I like to think of partial simulation and full simulation. Partial meaning I start from a survey that I collect with data that I collected and I amplify it, versus I don't start from that. I maybe it's pre-trained on a lot of data and I'm gonna generate things from scratch. So we started from partial simulation, where we were like, you know, if someone collects 1,000 responses, right, and I'm able to train a model on this data, I know from the traditional theory of AI and machine learning that I'm gonna be able to do better than the data itself through modeling. So what we proved to the world over the last 3 years is I can take 1,000 respondents, of which there is a group of 30 respondents, for example, and I can amplify this small group into 90 people worth of data, and provably, right? So until now, if you say I'm only looking at results for groups of 90 people and above, because I don't trust numbers below that, now you can look at groups with 30 people and above, by implementing this technology on top of your project. Just to give a concrete example, T-Mobile uses us in various trackers, and they collect data at the US national representative level. And the main problem is they only have enough data in 21 DMAs, which is obviously limiting. for everything they do. So they wrap their data collected with our models and they amplify it using our boosting technology. And now they have enough data to look at 98 DMAs, which is obviously basically opening so many doors in terms of doing local marketing strategies, for example, and all of this for amplification. So that's where we started from. We're now expanding into other territories. One of them is quality detection. So we built a platform for quality detection in basically survey data, which is kind of a last layer of defense before insights. So it's not really about VPN checks. So it's more about the coherence of the data because bad data in, bad models, and then bad insights out. And expanded also into basically generating answers to questions that weren't presented to some people. And now we're also basically venturing in the full simulation area with all the know-how, learnings, methodologies, and partnerships that we built on the partial simulation side. So that's basically Fairgen, orthogonally.
That was awesome. I'd probably have 20 questions based on that 3-minute answer. The quickest and easiest question is how do you do that? Like that seems you came with confidence that you started off with taking 21 DMAs and amplifying that is the word I think you used. I like that word to 98 DMAs, and that's where you started. How did you do that?
Yeah.
That's the basic question I have.
So let me prove to you why we can do better than the data, right? And sometimes it's very hard to believe, but there are simple ways to see it. So let's take a dummy example. Let's say you have a field of 1,000 respondents, and for whatever reason, you were interested in 22 to 24 years old, for
Yep.
example. Now, you have 22 to 24 years old. This is extremely limited from the quantitative perspective. Like, no one would really rely on such a small sample. However, you also have 30, 20 to 21 years old, and 27, 25 to 26 years old. Now, what we know is that there is a high chance that these three groups are extremely correlated, and you also have some kind of trend where probably answers vary in a sort of continuous way as age grows, right? And so, if you were to be able to, through a model or even like a more hard-coded way, combine these three samples in the right way, you obviously can reduce the variance of this small group that's in the middle, the 22 to 24 years old, right? So, for example, the simplest way is, let's say it's a scale question, and in 22 to 24 years old, you have a score of 3.4 out of 5. And for the two other groups, you have 2.7 and 3.9, right? 22 to 24 score has a massive margin of error. But if you were to, for example, do a weighted average of these three, maybe weighted by the number of respondents in each group, then you're probably gonna get a much more accurate score for these 22 to 24 years old. And that's how, and then you can derive everything from that. So what we did is, it's not practical to have to define every time, okay, I'm interested in this segment and I think that these segments are correlated on these questions, but not on this question. And for this question, get that other group. That's not practical. So what we did is we started from this intuition and then we built models that basically figure out correlations like question level and people level, and then basically are able to generalize this idea to any type of survey, quantitative surveys, on any type of use cases within the volumetries that we recommend based on our experimental knowledge. So that's basically why all of this is even possible.
And you got extremely granular. When as researchers, we talk 18 to 24-year-olds and 25 to 34-year-olds, which are actually rather large age ranges. I've just always accepted that, but I think an 18-year-old is very different than a 24-year-old. And you got very granular to like 22 and 23-year-olds. Is that a real example that you can even get more granular than we're used to getting as researchers?
We've done incredibly granular types of things. So yeah, age group is something, but for example, like when you do B2B things, like base sizes are often like way smaller. Like for example, you collect 200 samples, and there is this group of 14 individuals, and there is basically you can't say anything about this specific group, but that's a group you really care about. I know CEOs, for example, right? So that's the type of things that are super valuable, and we're trying to get 30 more CEOs would potentially triple the budget of this study, both in terms of time and in terms of actual dollar amounts. And so that's the kind of places where this technology is super useful.
And so, do you have to kind of study and build the model based upon lots of different sources? So you mentioned age and you mentioned CEOs. there are a lot of different things in between age and CEO. There's lots of different demographics. There's lots of different job titles. There's lots of different behaviors. Do you kind of have to be somewhat of an expert when building that on everything? That's a very ignorant question, but is that kind of true?
Here's the magic. One, like we build a platform, so it's a self-serve tool that basically is completely automated. So you just upload your CSV and you say, I want more CEOs. It's going to generate more CEOs. Okay, it's your responses. So there is no human in the loop on our side. It's completely automated, and
Oh wow.
so the modeling happens all basically in the back. And let me tell you why it is even possible, also from that perspective. So we are like on the partial simulation product, we're not using LLMs to generate responses. If we were to use LLMs to generate responses, it would be really hard because, for example, there's some topics where LLMs don't have a lot of knowledge, right? Or knowledge that's outdated. And then you need someone in the loop to be able to check and model and get things right. We're using statistical models, and we always start from a field that already ran. So statistical models basically are able to find these patterns and correlations without understanding the context of this study. So you don't need to know anything about automotive to be able to amplify an automotive survey. And that's why you need to start from a field to be able to do partial simulation. And that's why you don't need a human analyst in the loop on our side or theirs.
That's interesting. So in some ways, if they're doing these correlations without the context, they're doing it unbiasedly. That's how I would put it as a researcher.
That's
That
very cool.
researchers have bias inherently, whether we, apparent or not. But these statistical models, like you said, do not use the context. They'll kind of work under any scenario and be unbiased. Okay.
And that's actually a much better way to do it than what some people do to try to address this. So I was talking, last week to a team within one of the maybe top 10 companies in the world, inside teams, and they were telling me that there is this niche that's really hard for them to get enough base for. And so what they do is they created some proxy audiences, so not this audience, but like some like various similar audiences where they are able to get 10 times more data. So they get like, let's say, every wave 15 people from their niche, and then 120 people from proxy groups which are a bit similar but not exactly the same, and then they average them out. So our approach is basically a model version of that basically is less biased by the way you create the proxies, and it works for any new project. You don't need to think about what are the proxies, and you don't need to go through all of this hassle.
I'm gonna ask one more question. I'm sure Andrew has a billion too. I want to go back to the T-Mobile example. If you're allowed to kind of expand that, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But can they validate those models? Are they expanding on that? Do they do smaller research in those other markets? Can you kind of expand on how T-Mobile leverages Fairgen with more traditional research?
Yeah. So first, a lot of our business is going with partners. So I mentioned EFOP, but we have many others. For example, on the T-Mobile front, we work with Big Village, which is basically a very strong agency for everything, media research, measurement, and they like T-Mobile is their client, and they use our technology to basically serve T-Mobile's projects. So it's very it's been a strategy that's really worked so far, because everyone has a good interest in making it work like across the whole value chain. So that's basically how the T-Mobile thing worked. So the way T-Mobile played it, and actually the way all of our agency partners play it with, is typically running like a first project where the customer is going to do a deep dive, like a pretty quantitative deep dive into the results, and based on that, basically decide to do the next projects, like I would say live, without doing the real boost or without oversampling every time. Another way to show that it works, that pretty much every partner of us that has a significant research team has done, is parallel testing, where you take a big field, a big survey you collected responses from, and you basically split it into a training set and a holdout. We boost the training set, and then we compare it to the big holdout, and we show that we're closer to if we had collected a lot more responses in the survey. So, for example, we get 500 responses and groups of 20 to 50 people, let's say, and then we keep aside 4,000 responses, whereas these groups are, let's say, 8 times bigger, and we boost these small groups, and we compare to the same group, but that are much bigger in the holdout. And that allows us to show that our results get us closer to the results we would have had if we had more. And that's really the point that we're basically proving.
So it sounds like to me, this is kind of the dream of synthetic research from that perspective,
Yeah.
is that my guess is it's faster. You said it's more reliable. T-Mobile seems happy. Big Village is learning from this model too. Everyone's saving money and time throughout the process. Is that seemed pie in the sky to me 20 minutes ago, and maybe it's not as unrealistic as I initially thought.
That's a pretty accurate way. And if I just expand the story a little bit, my belief is, in the next few years, the way market research is going to transform is going to depend on basically like whether like at a project level, whether they're directional or absolute projects. That's how I like to differentiate projects. Either it's a project where you're trying to get a directional view or answer on something. For example, I'm about to launch like an ad and I have two concepts. I just want to know which one is gonna land better, right? And I don't have a massive budget. I want something directional, a yes or no, right? And on the other hand, you have use cases where it's super important to have like 1% or 2% margin of error because the decisions at stake are so important. For example, I'm going to get a $5 million billboard in the center of New York, and I want to make sure that this ad is going to be of good quality, right? You see the difference between absolute and directional. So my belief is for everything absolute research, the partial simulation suite we built is amazing because it allows to get absolute level of research at the price of the current directional, right? Through doing a directional field and amplifying it, right? So it's basically the super expensive research now made more affordable and also faster. On the directional side of things, where people today either do qual or do very small quant fields, I believe that a big chunk of that is going to be taken by what people think as full simulation or digital twins. Like there's many names for it, where you're emulating like all sorts of models to answer survey questions without actually running the field. And I believe that these models are going to get to good enough for directional insights, not for absolute stuff.
That's absolutely fascinating. And I think you're right. That's kind of the path that Brian and I have been going down in our exploration and our learning of this space across the course of the past year. And it is true that there are some decisions and some types of studies that we conduct where it's ultimately a go or no go decision, right? And whether or not it is a 79% or 69% positive response is irrelevant, right? It really comes down to the type of decision that will ultimately be made by the business. And I have not seen or experimented with, and maybe you can comment on this, different types of, I like that you say full simulation. We've been calling that kind of like a naive synthetic, as far as like it has not taken this survey before. It doesn't have any data that it has been trained on for this particular stimulus, right? Maybe categorically, but not that actual ad or that actual concept or message, what have you. In those situations, gosh, it's so interesting because I almost wonder if is it the population sizes that get you to this being advantageous? I'm talking around this, but so let me get really specific. Like if I have an ad and I just want to know whether or not I should run ad A or ad B.
Yeah.
Seems to me that like I'm probably going to get a yes or no accurately with a full simulation, a partial simulation, or with primary data and or organic data, as some people have been saying. I'm not sure if you've heard that term or not, Sam, but we think that's kind of funny. So does it then become a cost exercise and a speed exercise to say, look, full simulation is going to be less expensive. It's going to be a lot, shorter of timeline. Or does it also then become, if I just need a directional answer, I probably don't have a big research budget anyway, so I'm only going to do a couple hundred responses. Well, now if I'm doing simulation, though, I can look at even if it's just go or no go, I can see that by different demographic cohorts. I can see that in different geographies. And there's almost this, like, even though it's less statistical certainty, because you're able to simulate more granular groups, like there is more depth to a simulated response than if you had run the limited small budget primary research anyway. Does that make sense? I know I kind of talked around that a little bit, but I'm trying to put it in the box of like, look, these directional decisions don't have six-figure research budgets anyway. So if we're honest about the use case where like good enough is good enough, this may be providing a better, more statistically significant and more granular answer than that limited budget you were going to use to collect organic data anyway. Is that fair?
That's fair. I can also, like, the way I see it, which is pretty aligned, is deciding on the way to go in, let's say, 1 or 2 years. It's gonna be about, like, 3 parameters. One being budget, right? Two being importance of the insights, and so basically, stakes. We can call it stakes. And three, governance. So budget is obviously, like, that's something that you can't necessarily change by too many orders, right? So it's something that, really depending on your general budget, you're gonna have, that's a big parameter. The stake, if it's something super high stake, you're gonna tend to basically be willing to invest more and go to the more expensive approaches because things are at risk. And three, governance, like if you think about enterprise brands with, like, $1 million budgets versus, like, way smaller structure with much more limited budget, but not only budgets now, it's also about processes, right? So when you take an important decision that's going to be also probably costly, right? You typically need to be able to justify it. So a lot of research, a lot of the research market now is based around projects that are often just done for governance reasons, right? Because you need to be able to justify why you've invested in that or that or that, right? So I believe that, simulation, like full simulation for governance oriented, like, results, is not gonna take a big dent. However, for things where, for example, let's say there's a lot of decisions, like in the day-to-day of, startuppers, for example, that are just based on intuition, but often these decisions are wrong because you can't always trust your intuition. So if something a bit better than intuition is being able to simulate, right? That's better than intuition, but it's obviously worse than running the real field or running a limited field amplified by statistical models. So it's all about budget, stakes, and governance internally. That's my philosophy in, like, and my vision on how things are gonna go.
So you had mentioned that right now the product that you have on the market is this partial simulation.
Yeah.
Also moving into full simulation.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, and absolutely, please correct me if I'm wrong, the modeling that the Fairgen product currently does is advanced statistical modeling. So, like you said, you studied math, you have a PhD in artificial intelligence, and mathematics statistics, I'm sure, kind of in that area. So, what you've built in the AI front is not necessarily that the product is spinning up a bunch of, and correct me if I'm wrong, spinning up a bunch of individual personas who are then simulating
Yeah.
this and simulating that. The artificial intelligence part of it is the way that the product is interacting with the survey data to use these incredibly advanced, but like academically rigorous statistical methods. So the magic is that you're able to do incredibly advanced statistics quickly and scalably,
Exactly.
right?
That's
Which is,
exactly right.
and that makes Brian and I very happy, right? To hear that. And many of our listeners very happy to hear that. So if you're moving then into kind of that full simulation, though, what kind of challenges does that pose to someone who is clearly like rooted in the academic rigor of this space? What challenges does that pose to you and your team?
Let me tell you how I think about this. The main problem is there is some full simulation startups or companies arising that are saying market research is dead, surveys are dead, and we're gonna be able to simulate it all out. And, that's problematic because when the advantages and limitations of these models, you know that it's not made for all use cases, right? So my approach at Fairgen has always been about, we built already 3 products that are sort of basically in the hands of our customers. Now this is going to be the 4th. And every time it's all about, benchmarking, parallel testing, everything, and knowing where it works and where it doesn't, and always being open about saying where it won't work. So, every time like someone asks me, like from the sales call, where does this not work? Boosting, for example. And I have many, I can tell you, it's very interesting. A couple of examples where it doesn't work. And people are always surprised. Oh, wow, I'm very surprised that you tell me where it doesn't work because usually people are hiding this, right? But no. So for full simulation, I know that there's use cases like, as I was saying, like for example, when you use your intuition or you do a qual field that's very limited, and I'm a strong believer that you can do better than that. However, I'm also a strong believer that full simulation won't replace primary data and amplification and all this other stuff we're doing for high stakes projects. So I'm trying to build a full stack of basically the tools that we will use in the next years. That's the approach, and know where things fit and how and why, and take following this philosophy.
So it's more about that kind of horizontal integration for you moving into this, and you do see it as like a kind of a different space. That partial to full simulation is really a different product.
Yeah, completely. It's a completely different product made from
Completely
different.
different.
And it needs to be really clear, and we make it really clear. And yeah, it has to be really clear, because otherwise, like, you get into a situation where a customer isn't happy because he's saying it doesn't work. But basically, if it doesn't work because the use case and was out of guidelines and out of limitations and out of everything, then basically, the customer needs to know in advance. Otherwise, like, you're gonna get into trouble. And once you lose the confidence of a customer, you kind of lose it for a long time. So always need to be very
Yeah.
careful with claims and the guidelines.
Yeah. My leaf blower is really good at clearing off my driveway, but it does not work in the snow.
Yeah,
Right. So there's even though that's the same, we're trying to do the same thing, but it's the absolute wrong use case for clearing off my driveway. I would be really interested to hear. You mentioned that you'll be honest, you'll say where things do and don't work. I'd love to hear, first of all, just out of interest, where do the boosts not work? I think that would be interesting, and may give us a little bit more of a sense of how it's working, kind of, looking at it through that negative space as far as, hey, it doesn't work for XYZ. I'd also be interested to hear what areas you think, particularly in the full simulation, because that's kind of the boogeyman, right? Everyone in our space is hearing people say, survey panels are dead. It all hail the simulated data set. If there are use cases that you think will never be able to be solved by that fully simulated data.
So yeah, let's start with boost. So let's take a very simple example. Let's say you run a field, and every respondent responds to 15 questions, and then you basically, based on these questions, you're either gonna get to a second part of the questionnaire with 15 more questions or not. And let's say only 50 people out of the 300 that started actually responded to the second part of the questionnaire, this last 15 questions. And you're trying to boost this group, the people that passed and moved on to this last part. But the problem is you only have these 50 people that responded to this question, so you have nothing to extrapolate from. Remember the example about age? We had other groups we could extrapolate signal from, but here you only have these people. You don't have anything around that, and so basically that's unboostable. That's statistically unamplifiable, because you have nothing to extrapolate from. It's like, and basically the best you can do is duplicate these samples, and that's gonna bring you nothing in terms of margin of error. So that's actually, a case where you cannot do better than the data itself. And another case, which is an extension of that, is, let's say you have a survey and you run it in 10 different countries with different question names, because it's different languages, and then you structure your data file such that the first 20 columns are the questions in Spanish, and then the questions after are the questions in Portuguese and in French and so on. And then you kind of have this block structure where the first respondents are from the Spanish, and they only responded in this block of questions, and there's Portuguese and whatever. And then you try to boost basically from all Spanish speakers. But then you only have Spanish speakers responding to this set of questions. So then you're gonna boost and you're not gonna see any improvements. So what you should do is you should basically translate all of this to a unified language, and then you have your set of columns with basically respondent across country, one column identifying the language, and then everything works. So that's a case where you can actually save the use case because the question were the same, they were just encoded differently and in different columns, so you can reshape things and make it work. But there's cases where you can't, where for example each group receives a different number, a different set of questions. So it's really about the questionnaire structure, and we always onboard operations teams like field operations and so on that use our products on basically the questionnaire designs where this fits and the ones where it doesn't.
So just so I can clarify before we move on to the places where full simulation might fail. In your first example, is the function of the inability to boost coming from the limited base size of that remaining quota, or is it coming from the fact that the population is too homogenous, right? Because like if I survey 10,000 people in the United States and then ask you to boost Canadians, that's not going to work, right? So in your first example, is it because based on how they answered the first 15 questions, now they get to answer the last 15 questions? Is it that behavioral filtering that makes it a poor fit,
Yeah.
or is it because there's only a few people left?
Let's make it even slightly simpler. Only Gen Zs respond to the second part of the questionnaire. Okay, and you want to boost Gen Zs, but only the Gen Zs answered part 2 of the questionnaire. So you're not going to be able to extrapolate from other groups because you only have these Gen Zs that answered part 2 of the questionnaire. Everything else is nans, like missing values, right? So you cannot boost Gen Zs using only Gen Z data. You need other respondents from other groups to extrapolate from. So that's basically the reason why you can't do better than the data.
Got it. So I was wrong twice. So it wasn't based on it wasn't based on or the fact that it's also okay. That's very, very interesting. You can't even boost the group that did take the survey if it's the only group that took the survey.
Yeah,
Because you need these.
But you could, but within that you could though, right? If gender or different behaviors, you could, right? Yeah.
correct. You could do another cut. So you could,
Yeah.
for example, you could boost by genders, and then you'd have like you zoom on Gen Z males or zoom on Gen Z females. That's a very good point, Brian.
That's absolutely fascinating. Well, please tell our listeners where the boogeyman of full simulation will fail. What areas are safe?
There's a few things. So let's first think about what you need to build a strong full simulation product. First, you need super high volumes of super high quality data across industries, use cases, and so on that you care about. If you don't have access to high quality data, right, to be able to feed your models and in whatever way, let's forget about how this even works. You need high quality data refreshed across industries, across use cases, and so on. If you don't have that, you're screwed. The second thing you need is a really good methodology, and that's not simple. Like it's been proven over and over again that just saying to a ChatGPT or GPT API, you are a Gen Z living in Ohio and you earn like $80K per year. Please respond these 10 questions. Everyone knows that this doesn't work and this is super far from reality and it's unusable. It's way worse than even your intuition, like pretty much everywhere. So you need a way better methodology than that. We have a lot of secret sauce that we learned from these other products that we extended to this, and that made like a dramatic change over like more like naive or baselines basically. So you need a very strong set of methodological insights so it works across types of use cases, types of questions, and so on. And the last thing you need is a good understanding of basically the scope where you can apply this and what are the claims you can actually make. So for example, we talked a lot about full simulation and where it fits. I was mentioning that it's never going to be used to compute the market share of a product in a specific region, for example. Like if you're trying to know what is the awareness of this moisturizer cream in Ohio, right, and in other regions, like that's definitely not something that's gonna be able to derive that from first principles. Maybe it's gonna find it online in a survey report by someone, but it's not going to be able to simulate that in the right way. So now, just based on all of this, where does it fit? It fits in use cases and industries where you have data, right? That's one. Where directional is useful, and and you don't need absolutes, right? And I believe also in companies where digital is at the forefront and transformation. So that's basically where I'd put some emphasis. Where it's not gonna work is anything that's very hardcore quant. Like for example, you have some companies running like crazy complicated like conjoint like architectures and to derive very complex insights and so on. Like we're far from being able to replace that with full simulation, like very, very far. However, for like quick concept test, ads test, message test, feature screening, like this kind of things, I believe that this is gonna be very useful as long again as the claims are moderate and more than moderate. I would say calibrated. That's I think is the word. And don't trust anyone telling you that you can replace panel data with everywhere with By the way, I can give you a good a reply to these guys, right? Because to be able
Please.
to have good fully simulated data, you need to also have industry reports and it's kind of based on surveys that are telling you for example in this market these are the most trending products and so on. If you don't have these numbers, that comes from surveys obviously, then the models are gonna be outdated. They're gonna be based
Right.
of 3 years ago. But ChatGPT, I don't know, has doubled year over year or even more their share of the general world population. So if you don't get this data coming obviously from the real world and the real respondents, then basically these simulations are gonna be simulations of the state of 3 years ago, and that's not useful. So panel data still has a big role to play.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've always used the example that, whatever data that you've trained the full simulation on, it's outdated immediately. And I use this in the example of like if I'm running a brand tracker for an airline and simulated data, the AIs, the personas, digital twins, whatever you want to call them, like they're not aware that someone just got dragged down the aisle of an American Airlines flight,
Yeah.
right? And so something as simple as that is like brand sentiment can change dramatically based on a current event. Well, we want to be very respectful of your time, Sam. Thank you so much for all of this detail. This is certainly one of my favorite episodes we've recorded so far. Is there anything that you would leave us with as we continue to kind of explore this topic?
I would gear up. I would start gearing up. And I think choose the right partners. I think is also a good one. And good luck to all of us.
So that's great. Are you planning on doing a U.S. tour next year, a little road show? Do we maybe could buy you an adult beverage?
I'm coming in January to Miami actually for there's a CEO summit,
Yeah.
and then in March Samuel Cohen and the core.
Oh,
We're doing it all.
SampleCon. You're gonna come disrupt. I love it.
Exactly.
Well, we'll likely be there as well. So it'll be great to meet you in person and have the late night conversations where all the juicy details come out. So really appreciate you joining us.
Sam, if people want to learn more about Fairgen, get in touch with you, get in touch with the organization, where and how can they do that?
I think I'd recommend just reaching out on LinkedIn. I'm very present there. So yeah, LinkedIn or through our website. There's many ways to reach out to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you.